Technology licensing. In this nugget, we look at a subject that you might find boring, but once you get under the first couple levels, you start to see how, I hope, fascinating this thing is, especially if you work as an IT sales representative for a company that makes its living publishing software. We're going to learn in this nugget how software licensing works and how software intellectual property is protected. We'll look at software registration and activation technologies, and then we'll conclude with a consideration of digital rights management, or DRM. Let's get to work. Software license types. One thing that I've always found really fascinating about computer software is the notion that when you go to the store, let's say, and purchase a PC game, you're not buying the software. You're not buying the game. If you ask many non-technical people, they think, yes, I own a copy of that game DVD. Or in a business context, I purchased a copy of Intuit QuickBooks. I own that software. No, that's not true. What you're paying for is the right to install and use that software. You're paying for the software license. You see what I'm saying? That's where this stuff really gets interesting. Maybe you're paying for the production costs of the DVD media and of the packaging, and if there's inserted stuff, sure, that costs money. But no, you don't own that code. In a closed source, commercial, or proprietary software scheme, you're paying what's called a single user license fee. And what that means is you purchase the software, and that gives you the right to install the software one time only and is usable only by you. That is, according to the letter of the law, what a single user license is. And the notion of digital rights management and software activation, those are methods that commercial software publishers use to make sure that users aren't abusing their license, for instance by installing multiple copies of that software on multiple computers. So commercial or proprietary software is almost always closed source. And what this means, as we talked about in the previous nugget, is that it would take you a lot of work and be almost impossible to reverse engineer the source code based on the compiled installer that you get when you download the software or if you receive it on a physical DVD or CD media. Why do we have closed source? Well, it's to protect a company's intellectual property or IP assets. If we've developed a really nifty piece of business software, we obviously want to make money or make a profit on that product. If we reveal the source code, then that gives other people the ability to compile variants of that software and make their own money off of our blood, sweat, and tears. So closed source makes a lot of sense from a business perspective. One thing that's always discouraged me, and I guess I have to confess that I'm biased in as much as I've worked in software development for many years, and I've seen products that I've worked really hard on stolen by software pirates around the world. And if you talk to some of these software pirates, and I've done so, the common refrain that you get is, knowledge is free. Well, what these people don't understand is that knowledge that they think should be free is actually what puts food on the software developer's table at night to feed his or her family. And I sometimes draw the analogy, okay, Mr. or Mrs. Software Pirate, let's say whatever service you're in should be free. So if that individual works at a plumber, why don't I say, well, plumbing work should be free? How would you like that if you worked as a plumber but lost a significant amount of your income because everybody believes that it's a right to receive plumbing services without paying for it? Now, I'm going to step off my soapbox here, but I just wanted to make that very real case with regard to what goes on with commercial software publishers and how it's a constant battle to protect their intellectual property. The other main commercial license type for software besides single user is what's called a site or a volume license. And this is intended for businesses that are at the outset going to install multiple instances of a single piece of software, and you want to avoid the tedium of having to put in or enter a product license number over and over and over again, or worse, keep track of several product ID or license numbers, one per installation. No, that's not going to work. Microsoft has pioneered in large part the volume licensing strategy. So for instance, you might be responsible for purchasing a volume license so that you can install Windows 7 on 1,000 computers in your organization. What Microsoft will give you is a single product key that's good for 1,000 product activations. You see how that works? So volume licensing gives systems administrators an easier time on managing installed software and keeping track of those licenses, and also helps the business, that is to say Microsoft, because they're able to move more product. Also, you tend to get a discount when you purchase licenses in bulk in a site or volume license. Now, there's some other lesser known, lesser used commercial license types. Sometimes you'll find with PC technician software, you'll see what's called a technician license. And what this is, it's a variant of a single user license, such that it gives you, the purchaser, the right to use that software on as many PCs as you want, but you can't actually permanently install the software on all those machines. So for instance, you could install the software on a USB thumb drive, and if you're working in PC repair, chances are you want to use that diagnostic tool on just about every PC that comes across your workbench. So the technician license is a nice way to stay legal and use the software in the way that it's designed to be used. On the other side of the fence, from commercial, you have freeware. Now, on first blush, you might think, oh, freeware is the same thing as open source. No, that's not the case. Freeware is generally closed source, so the actual source code is proprietary to the software publisher, but freeware is distributed with no restrictions on use, and of course, it's given away for free, so that individuals who want to use this freeware can do so. They can install and run the program. There's not a demo timeout period. There's not a license or activation key involved, but you can't reverse engineer the software. Now, why do people publish freeware? It really depends. Some folks are just good people and they develop a useful piece of software and they're willing to freely share it with the community at large. Oftentimes, software vendors will publish utilities. For instance, antivirus companies like Sophos or Symantec will often distribute these mini scanners to combat specific malicious software programs, and they'll distribute those mini scanners as freeware with no specific restrictions as to how many computers can use them and so forth. In between freeware and open source, we have what's called shareware or donateware. Shareware became particularly popular once personal computers really ramped up in the mid-90s or so. Shareware gives the user the ability to test drive the software. Either they have a specific shareware trial version that has a smaller subset of features from the full commercial product. Maybe it has limited functionality. For instance, you might download a shareware word processor that enables you to create and edit documents, but not save or print them until you purchase the access code or the single user license. Or in a game world, a shareware version, or also called a trial version, might give you the first couple of levels of the full game, but you don't unlock the rest of the product until you pay for the license. That's what shareware is. It's a nice way to give customers an idea of what they're purchasing before they actually shell out the money. Now, this model actually helps the software developer as well, because the idea is they should get fewer requests for chargebacks or fewer returns, complaints, because the users had an opportunity to test the software for free before they invested their money. Donateware is essentially freeware with a disclaimer. That is to say, the software developer says, you can use this software, not limited functionality, but the whole thing, for as long as you want, but it would be nice if you gave me some money. And believe it or not, there are people, myself included, who, if they really like a piece of donateware, will send the author some money. It's a really nice thing to do. It also helps fund further editions of that software. Oh, the other way that shareware works is either a limited functionality product, as I just said, or the other thing is that you'll get the full featured product, but it's on a timer. That is to say, after 7, 14 days, 30 days, etc., the product will just not work anymore, or it'll go into limited functionality mode. Finally, we have the open source. Open source software in general uses the GNU Public License, or GPL, copyleft as it's called, and this deals with completely exposed source code, and I won't repeat everything we learned in the previous nugget about open source. I think you have a pretty good idea of how it works by now. Software registration and activation. Because I've worked in software development for a long time, I don't have rose-colored glasses on with regard to the idea of preventing software from being pirated or stolen by individuals around the world. Software developers who understand how this works tend to have the attitude, well, we can't prevent piracy 100%, but we can make piracy so difficult as to render the process not worth it for definitely the casual hacker or cracker, but perhaps even not worth it for more experienced hackers and crackers. But if someone really wants to crack your software, they're going to do it. It's really the way it is. There's some smart people in the world. Now, the software registration issue is a little different from activation. Oftentimes, I'm sure you've installed software, and after it's been installed, especially after you've put in your product key and officially licensed the software, you'll be prompted to register with the vendor. Now, what does this do? Privacy advocates say, well, it gives the vendor my email address so they can sell it to spammers. But there's really other good reasons to register your product with the vendor. You have a record of having purchased the software from the vendor, so there's a start date to your support, and you can also be notified if product updates are relevant to what product you've purchased from the vendor, etc. Product activation is overlapping with registration in as much as it deals with preventing or limiting this piracy, like I said. You might have a registration activation scheme that requires the user to input their single user license key before installation completes. Activation is another layer on top of that, such that post-installation, the application phones home, as it's called, or establishes an internet connection with the independent software vendor, or ISV, and does kind of an under-the-hood registration such that this product ID number is validated, and then the software is given an official quote-unquote stamp of approval as being genuine. Now, most independent software vendors will almost constantly scour the internet for pirated registration keys and put those on blacklists such that if you did happen to download a cracked version of the software or a version of the software with which you're registering a pirated key, the registration and activation process should be able to detect that, and sometimes independent software vendors will cripple the software if that's the case. So we don't need to get really under the hood with regard to registration and activation. Just know that there are several modalities around that enable software vendors to ensure that their customers, or those who are using the software, are running legitimate copies and not pirated ones. So in sum, the benefits of software registration and product activation are notification of software updates, and even frankly, the allowance of those updates to happen. I think of Microsoft Windows. With Microsoft Windows, you can actually install the operating system without inputting a product key. You'll be nagged every day, though, for the next 30 days to activate the software, which, as I said, is a two-step process. You put in your product key, and then you do an internet or by telephone activation with Microsoft directly. If you don't activate by the end of those 30 days, Windows goes into reduced functionality mode. I'm speaking of Windows 7 here specifically, such that the desktop wallpaper that you selected gets replaced with straight black. You get pop-up notifications and reminders that you're running a non-genuine version of Windows. And most importantly, when your system is in that non-genuine state, you're not going to receive all of the critical updates that your system should get to protect it from malware. You see what I mean? So our benefits besides that are you're registering your product as legal, and therefore you qualify for support from the vendor. And then there's the idea of legality. Now, all of my soapboxing on software piracy is all well and good when we're talking about acting as an individual in a consumer environment. However, the stakes go up significantly in the business world. If you as a systems administrator make the mistake of installing pirated software on any of your systems within your organization, you're much more likely to get the entire organization in trouble, not to mention lose your job. So the legality issue is specifically important in a business context. Whereas product keys, product registration, and product activation are methods by which software vendors can protect their intellectual property, we're going to complete this nugget now by looking at the same scheme, intellectual property protection, but here focusing on what's called creative media, works of audio, video, and ebooks. This technology is called digital rights management, or DRM. Now, because it's kind of inane and ridiculous to think of reverse engineering an audio file, we approach protecting this kind of intellectual property, or IP, in a different way than we do with, say, software licensing. Think of an audio CD that a band produces. They obviously receive a royalty every time someone legitimately purchases that CD. However, if the person who bought the CD then rips the audio tracks from it and publishes them on BitTorrent or some other peer-to-peer file-sharing network, and 10,000 people download a copy of that CD, well, you can see that we're talking about a lot of lost revenue. The same goes for movies and their DVD companions, as well as electronic books, also called ebooks. So all you need to know about DRM is that it's number one, used to protect creative media, and number two, it tends to serve as a restriction of certain actions with that media. In the case of electronic books or ebooks, maybe you have DRM attached to an Adobe Acrobat portable document format or PDF file, such that when you open the PDF, you're able to read it on your computer screen, but you're not allowed to save a copy of it elsewhere, certainly not a copy without the protection embedded. You may be prohibited from printing that PDF. Again, all with the idea of protecting intellectual property, but also giving you, the customer, as much freedom as possible. That's actually a very serious tug of war that goes on with publishers, and I know because I've worked for a publisher for a long time, in terms of wanting to protect your intellectual property and getting heavy on the DRM on one side at the expense of the user experience. There's nothing worse than a legitimate customer who's paid money for your product to then find that they're unable to do what they want to with that product because you have it locked down so heavily. So some publishers actually eschew, if you don't mind the $5 word, DRM, because they want their legitimate paying customers to be as happy as possible. With regard to audio and video licensing, you might have the piece of creative media stop after a certain number of times that clip has been played, and you also have, or we also have, copy prevention mechanisms. Now, some of you may be thinking, hardy har har, I have a friend or a relative or a colleague who knows how to get around all of these DRMs. And that harkens to what I said earlier in this nugget, that publishers aren't dumb. They understand that there are very intelligent people out there who burn a lot of daylight in overcoming or cracking digital rights management. The point again is to make the learning curve high enough to override the DRM, to ward off any casual hackers or casual folks who want to bypass the legality here, and make the entry requirement high enough to where really it takes a very seasoned or dedicated individual to cross that hump. The problem with that, though, is once this hump has been crossed and your DRM's been broken, that individual or group of individuals is probably going to release that product out into the wild, into the peer-to-peer sharing networks, and then again, we're dealing with significantly lost revenue on the part of the publishing company. Technology licensing review. In this nugget, we looked at the various software license types. On one end, you have your closed source software, your commercial software, and on the other end of the spectrum, we have our open source. Somewhere in between, we have our freeware and shareware varieties. We then looked at intellectual property protection methods, including software registration and activation and why that's important, and then applying the same type of technology to creative media. That was called DRM, Digital Rights Management. I hope that this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.